Marcus preferred the company of deceased civilizations. His small apartment, a deliberate fortress against the clamor of the contemporary, smelled perpetually of aged paper and lukewarm coffee. As a historian specializing in defunct belief systems, he found solace in the methodical excavation of forgotten truths, dissecting the illogical with surgical precision. Superstition, in his view, was merely a misinterpretation of observable phenomena, a narrative constructed by minds ill-equipped for rational inquiry. He considered himself eminently well-equipped. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, an anomaly in his carefully structured existence. Its envelope was thick, cream-colored, bearing a crest he did not recognize. Inside, the formal language of a distant legal firm detailed an unexpected inheritance: Blackwood Manor. Marcus read the name twice, a faint tremor disturbing his usual composure. He had no living relatives, no connections to any Blackwood. The accompanying documents outlined a convoluted lineage, terminating abruptly with his name. The manor, it explained, was situated in a remote, unnamed district, several hours' drive from any significant settlement. A brief, almost apologetic paragraph mentioned certain local legends regarding the property, which the firm assured him were entirely without merit. Marcus, ever the rationalist, scoffed aloud at the implication. Legends were the grist for his academic mill, not a cause for concern. A week later, Marcus found himself piloting his sensible sedan down a progressively narrower, unpaved road. The landscape had shed all pretense of human habitation miles ago. Trees, skeletal and gnarled, clawed at a perpetually overcast sky. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old iron. He had dismissed the solicitor's veiled warnings, the hushed tones of the estate's appointed manager during their brief, awkward phone call. He was going there for historical data, to catalog, to understand. The property, with its rumored dark reputation, presented an interesting academic challenge, a primary source begging for deconstruction. The road finally opened onto a vast, flat expanse. To his left, stretching into the gray distance, lay the frozen lake, its surface a mosaic of cracked ice, reflecting the leaden sky like a broken mirror. It was utterly still, devoid of life, a vast, silent testament to the region's desolation. The sight, though starkly beautiful, caused a subtle tightening in his chest. This was isolation on a scale he rarely encountered, even in his research. Blackwood Manor emerged from the mist-shrouded distance like a forgotten sentinel. Turrets rose like blunted teeth, and gables sagged with the weight of centuries. The air, even outside the vehicle, felt unnaturally heavy, as if pressing down on his lungs. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ground, or perhaps it was just the vibration of his own tired muscles. The caretaker, a man whose face was etched with the harsh lines of rural living, approached with a slow, deliberate gait. He introduced himself simply as the groundskeeper. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, held a depth of weary resignation that Marcus found unsettling. "You're Marcus," the groundskeeper stated, his voice raspy, devoid of inflection. "Thought you'd arrive today. He usually lets them in on a Tuesday." Marcus felt a prickle of unease. He? The manor is a she now? He attempted a light, dismissive tone, but it fell flat in the heavy air. The groundskeeper merely grunted, producing a heavy iron key from his pocket. "It's been empty for a long time. People don't stay, not once they get to know her." He gestured vaguely at the manor with his chin. "You'll find the electric is on. Water, too. Just..." He thanked the groundskeeper, who merely nodded, then retreated to his cottage without another word, leaving Marcus alone before the looming structure. The sheer scale of the place was daunting. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the stone facade, obscuring details, lending the entire structure an organic, almost living quality. The front door, a monstrous slab of oak reinforced with iron, stood slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. Or perhaps, Marcus thought, it simply hadn't been secured in decades. He pushed the door inward. It groaned, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through grimy, leaded windows. Marcus, ever the historian, felt a professional curiosity stir, overriding the nascent unease. He was here to catalog, to understand the narrative. He would peel back the layers of this place, dissect its legends, and expose the mundane truths beneath. The manor, however, felt less like a collection of historical artifacts and more like a vast, silent maw. He was determined. He would not be swayed by atmosphere. The key, cold and massive, felt like a relic in Marcus's hand. The sheer scale of the place was daunting. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the weathered stone, obscuring most of the windows and lending the manor a skeletal aspect. Marcus pushed the heavy oak door inward. A chill, damp and ancient greeted him, immediately infiltrating his wool coat. The air hung thick with the scent of dust, decaying wood, and something indefinably metallic, like old blood or rusted iron. Shafts of weak afternoon light, fractured by grime-coated panes, illuminated motes dancing in the stagnant air. This was not merely an old house. It was a mausoleum of forgotten time. His initial task was clear: establish a base of operations. He retrieved his crates of books, documents, and research materials from his rented vehicle. The effort of hauling each heavy box up the steps and into the manor was considerable, his breath clouding in the cold air. He selected a room off the main hall, a former study perhaps, with high ceilings and a large, if grimy, window offering a distant view of the winter-blighted grounds. Its primary advantage was a sturdy, if scarred, oak desk. He began systematically. Books were arranged by subject matter, archival boxes stacked neatly. The familiar ritual of organizing his life's work provided a comforting structure against the unsettling grandeur of the manor. Hours passed. He paused, his pen hovering over a ledger. He attributed it to the sheer size of the building, the poor insulation. Old houses, especially those left dormant, had their quirks. He shifted in his chair, unconsciously hunching his shoulders against the sensation, and continued his work. It was indistinct, a rustle of sound, like dry leaves skittering across stone, or perhaps words spoken just beyond the threshold of comprehension. He stopped, listening intently. He rose to stretch, his joints protesting the prolonged sitting. He walked to the window, peering through the grimy pane. Beyond the skeletal trees, a vast expanse of white gleamed faintly under the emerging moonlight. The frozen lake. Its surface, a sheet of frosted glass, stretched into the distance, reflecting the muted sky. He recalled the groundskeeper's brief, terse mention of it during their initial conversation. Mind the lake. She's deep even when she's locked up tight. The image was stark, desolate. Returning to his desk, Marcus noticed something amiss. His favorite fountain pen, a sturdy brass instrument he had left resting precisely on a particular page of his current research, now lay a full inch to the left, slightly askew. He stared at it, a flicker of irritation, then amusement crossing his features. "Getting clumsy in my old age," he muttered, picking it up and replacing it exactly where it had been. He was tired, perhaps. He decided to explore a little before resting, feeling the pull of the manor's history. He drifted through the adjoining rooms, each echoing the same decay and forgotten grandeur. In a dusty drawing room, behind a collapsing velvet curtain, he found a small, unmarked wooden chest tucked into a recess in the wall. It was not locked. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst moth-eaten silk, lay a collection of brittle, leather-bound journals and loose, yellowed letters. The script was spidery, almost illegible in places. He pulled one out, carefully unfolding a letter. It was undated, unsigned, but the hand was frantic. It seeps in, not from the walls, but from within. My thoughts. They are not my own. Blurring the edges. What is real? The house remembers. It watches. Marcus frowned, his analytical mind already dissecting the text. An isolated individual, perhaps prone to melancholia, suffering from the effects of solitude. The local legends often spoke of madness descending upon previous inhabitants. He picked up a journal. The entries, though more coherent, echoed the same unnerving themes. August 14th. The furniture shifts in the night. Small movements, imperceptible unless one is looking. I replace the chair, but it always returns. It clings to me, even by the fire. My memories. They feel distant, like another man's life. Is this the house's doing? The groundskeeper warned me. He spoke of others. Consumed. I thought it superstition. Now I wonder. Marcus closed the journal, a faint prickle of unease finally beginning to override his scholarly detachment. He placed it carefully back in the chest. These were not simply the ramblings of a lonely mind. There was a pattern here, a terrifying consistency across different hands, different eras. He rationalized the coincidence as a shared psychological response to isolation and a decaying environment. Yet, a new tension settled in his shoulders, a subtle tightening that felt less like physical strain and more like a visceral apprehension. The manor, he mused, certainly had a way of influencing its inhabitants, even if only through suggestion. He decided to continue reading in the morning. The silence of the manor had begun to thin, no longer a comforting blanket for solitary study, but a stretched membrane, vibrating with imperceptible currents. Marcus, hunched over another faded journal in the library's dim light, felt it first as an auditory phenomenon, a faint rasp, like dry paper shifting, or a whisper caught on a distant draft. He paused, pencil hovering above his notepad, and listened. The sound did not repeat. He attributed it to the old house settling, the wind finding a new seam in the ancient stone. Days bled into a pattern of intense research and unsettling sensory disturbances. The rasping returned, often when he was most deeply engrossed, a phantom rustle just beyond the reach of conscious thought. Sometimes it coalesced into something more distinct, a low murmur that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the walls themselves. He would cock his head, straining to decipher it, but the moment he focused, it would dissolve back into the house's ambient creaks and groans. It was a trick of the ear, he decided, the mind's tendency to impose meaning on ambiguity. A movement in the hallway when he passed the library door, a ripple of deeper gloom in the corner of the dining room. He dismissed these two as fatigue, or the natural play of the manor's few weak electric lights against the deep, ancient paneling. His logical mind, a fortress built of skepticism and empirical data, stood firm. But the assaults were becoming more frequent, more insistent. His sleep, once deep and restorative, fractured into disjointed, vivid nightmares. They were not conventional horrors, but rather disorienting shifts in reality. Figures, indistinct and faceless, would sometimes appear at the end of a corridor, their presence more a feeling of profound sorrow than a physical threat. He pushed the nightmares aside, attributing them to the stress of his work and the isolation. He was, after all, alone in a vast old house, immersed in histories of solitude and decay. It was natural for his subconscious to conjure such imagery. His research continued, a relentless pursuit through the previous inhabitants' effects. He found more journals, letters, property deeds, and family records. The manor had passed through numerous hands over the centuries. A reclusive botanist in the mid-1800s, known for his meticulous observations, descended into a fixation on the breathing of the house. Much like Marcus himself, arrived eager to chronicle the region's history. He was found catatonic, muttering fragments of archaic poetry that no one could identify, and died months later in an institution, never having regained lucidity. It wasn't just isolation. It wasn't just bad luck. The common thread was not personality, profession, or even era. It was the house. Each occupant, especially those who had spent extended, solitary periods within its walls, had experienced a similar decline. Madness, disappearance, suicide. He closed the heavy ledger, the leather cover cool beneath his fingers. The clinical detachment he so prided himself on was cracking. He could almost discern words, individual syllables, just out of reach, like a language he once knew but had since forgotten. It was not a trick of the light, nor a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was happening to him. Marcus paused, pen hovering over the brittle parchment of the journal. He had attributed the sound to the house settling, an old structure groaning under its own weight. But this was different. It was too regular, too close. He listened, holding his breath, the air in the library suddenly heavy with a static charge. The sound ceased. He exhaled slowly, a wisp of vapor in the cool air, and returned to the faded script. Minutes later, a distinct sigh feathered past his ear, a cold current that raised gooseflesh along his arm. He spun, chair scraping loudly against the polished floorboards. The room was empty, the shadows clinging to the bookshelves undisturbed. Yet the distinct impression of a recently departed presence lingered, like the ghost of a scent. He told himself it was fatigue, the overactive imagination of a man immersed in centuries of melodrama. He had been digging into the manor's archives for weeks, piecing together fragments of its troubled past. Suicides, disappearances, inexplicable bouts of madness among its former occupants. The stories were potent, certainly, but only stories. He tried to resume his work, but concentration eluded him. The words on the page blurred, replaced by a subtle shift in the library's familiar architecture. The heavy oak desk seemed to ripple at its edges, the worn leather of the armchair next to it deepening to an unnerving, almost corporeal crimson. A woman's faint, high-pitched sob, distant yet utterly clear, echoed from no discernible direction. Marcus gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. He blinked, hard, rubbing his eyes. When he opened them, the desk was solid oak again, the armchair merely faded leather. The sob was gone. He stood, pushing away from the desk, a tremor running through his frame. This was more than settling timbers. This was a direct, internal assault. The next incident was more profound. He was in the drawing room, inspecting a portrait of a stern-faced matriarch from the 18th century, when the light abruptly dimmed. Not from an external cloud, but as if the very illumination of the room had been siphoned away. The air grew frigid, biting at his exposed skin. He saw it then, not with his eyes, but as if the scene was laid bare directly upon his retina. A child, small and pale, dressed in heavy woolens, standing by a tall, frost-rimmed window. The child's breath plumed in the cold air. The scene was utterly silent, yet Marcus felt the child's profound sorrow, a crushing weight of abandonment. He spread out maps of the estate, genealogical charts, property deeds. He sought logic, a pattern, anything to explain the intrusions. But the house offered no sanctuary from itself. He became acutely aware of a pervasive, unseen scrutiny. Every movement he made, every thought that formed in his mind, felt exposed, laid bare to an ancient, discerning intelligence. It was as if the very walls possessed eyes, the floorboards ears, and the air itself held a silent, predatory anticipation. He found himself walking the long, empty corridors, drawn by an inexplicable pull. He saw nothing, yet the feeling was overwhelming, a parasitic emotion latching onto his own. He paused at a window overlooking the estate's extensive grounds. Beyond the overgrown gardens, past the gnarled skeletal trees, lay the frozen lake. As he stared at the glassy surface, a new vision surged, more vivid, more harrowing than the others. He was no longer merely observing. He was within it. The biting wind whipped around him, stinging his cheeks. The air carried the metallic scent of iron and the acrid tang of fear. He was standing on the shore of the frozen lake, the ice groaning ominously. Before him, a figure, indistinct but clearly a male, struggled on the treacherous surface, arms flailing, a desperate choked cry ripped from his throat. The ice fractured with a sickening crack, and the figure plunged into the black water. He heard the desperate gurgle, the final frantic thrashing. His clothes felt heavy, waterlogged, though they were perfectly dry. The experience was too real, too visceral to be a mere trick of the mind. The house was not merely haunted. It was a living archive of anguish, replaying its most traumatic memories and forcing him into them. It was absorbing him. He listened, holding his breath, the silence of the study pressing in around him, thick and expectant. The sound came again, a dry, rhythmic scrape from somewhere within the walls, or perhaps beneath the floorboards, just out of sight. He rose from the heavy oak desk, his movements stiff, a faint ache in his lower back. The chill in the room seemed to deepen with his stillness. Nothing. He waited. A minute passed, then another. The house offered only its usual profound quiet, punctuated by the faint whistle of the wind through a loose pane upstairs. He frowned, a crease forming between his brows. His mind, trained to seek logical explanations, struggled to reconcile the distinctness of the sound with its immediate cessation. Days blurred into a seamless continuum of research and this creeping, indefinable unease. Marcus found himself increasingly disinclined to leave the manor. When he finally remembered it, the battery was dead. He plugged it in, watching the small indicator light glow red. He needed to contact his solicitor about some outstanding paperwork, and perhaps a colleague about a specific historical reference. He tapped the screen, but the signal bars remained stubbornly empty. He tried again, moving to different windows, even venturing into the drafty, echoing entrance hall. A persistent no-service message mocked his efforts. He tried the landline, a heavy, antiquated device in the study. He lifted the receiver. No dial tone. He tapped the cradle, jiggled the cord. Dead. It was an old house, he reasoned. The wiring was ancient, the phone lines likely neglected for years. He could drive into the nearest village, he told himself, use a payphone, or find a cafe with Wi-Fi. But the thought felt strangely heavy, laden with an invisible resistance. The house's history, its secrets, felt more immediate, more vital than any external communication. He ate when he remembered, often just a piece of dry bread or a leftover apple, consumed while hunched over a tome. His clothes, once pressed, became wrinkled and faintly scented with dust and old paper. One afternoon, standing at a tall, leaded window, Marcus looked out across the bleak winter landscape. The world outside the manor seemed muted, distant. Beyond the skeletal trees, the expanse of the frozen lake stretched, a vast white sheet reflecting the pale, indifferent sky. Its surface was scarred with cracks, like old porcelain, hinting at the depths beneath, unmoving, silent. He remembered a time, not so long ago, when the sight of such a natural wonder would have stirred a sense of freedom, a desire to walk its expanse. He felt the house around him, not just as a structure of stone and timber, but as a living, breathing entity. It was a possessiveness that seeped into his bones, a slow, insidious draining of his will. It was as if the very air he breathed within the manor was infused with a subtle sedative, dampening his anxieties, quieting the clamor for external contact. Everything is satisfactory. He cut the conversation short, an inexplicable urgency to return to his work overriding any social niceties. He felt a distinct pull, a quiet insistence from the house, drawing his back to the study, to the journals. He looked down at his hands. The skin was dry, the nails slightly chipped. He hadn't washed his hair in days, the strands feeling stiff and dull. Yet, the sight stirred no immediate desire for change. The house, he realized, had subtly adjusted his priorities. Personal well-being felt trivial, secondary to the relentless pursuit of its history, to the quiet companionship of its ancient walls. He was no longer just an inhabitant. He was becoming part of its fabric, willingly, almost eagerly, allowing it to consume him. The rasp, he sometimes thought, was not just a sound in the house, but a sound of the house, a dry, hungry sigh. He listened. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping on the polished wood, and moved toward the source, his gaze sweeping the ornate wallpaper, the heavy oak paneling. Nothing. Yet the sound intensified, now a soft, continuous hiss, like air escaping a ruptured membrane. It filled the room, pressing against his eardrums until he could almost feel the vibration in his teeth. He shook his head, a sudden, jarring disorientation seizing him. This room, the study, felt off. He knew this room. He had spent weeks here, meticulously cataloging the previous owner's archives. He knew every crack in the plaster, every faded section of the rug. But the portrait, the absence of the clock, the slightly altered angle of the window overlooking the overgrown gardens, it was all subtly, terrifyingly wrong. It felt distant, like a word he had learned recently, not one intrinsically tied to his being. He closed his eyes, pressing his palms against his temples. He was Marcus, a historian. He had inherited this manor. He had come here to research. These were facts. He clung to them with desperate tenacity. He needed a breath of fresh air. He turned toward the door he knew led to the main hall, his hand outstretched. But the door was not there. He spun around, searching for the other exit, the one leading to the narrow servants' passage. That, too, was gone. The room had become a seamless box, the only discernible features the window and the unsettling portrait. He walked to the window, pulling aside the heavy velvet drape. A frozen lake stretching to the horizon under a leaden sky. A biting wind, sharp with the scent of ice and distant pine, seemed to seep through the glass. Not mine, he thought, his heart hammering. He was, but the certainty wavered, a thin, fragile thread. He remembered walking on that frozen lake, the crunch of snow under heavy boots, the way the light caught the ice. Whose boots? Whose fall? The details were vivid, too real to be an imagined scene, yet utterly alien to his own lived experience. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The room was shrinking, or perhaps he was growing larger. The walls seemed to lean inward, the ceiling to press down. He ran his hand over the wooden paneling, searching for a seam, a latch, anything. His fingers found nothing but smooth, unyielding timber. He couldn't make out individual words, but the tone was accusatory, sorrowful, demanding. He covered his ears, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to block out the invading sound, the invading thoughts. "I am Marcus," he repeated aloud, his voice cracking. "My name is Marcus." But a different name formed in his mind, clear as a bell. Arthur. And with it, a torrent of images. A heavy quill scratching on parchment late into the night. The cloying scent of stale pipe tobacco. The bitter taste of defeat. He saw a ledger, filled with meticulous entries of failing crops and mounting debts. He felt the crushing weight of a legacy, a manor that demanded more than it gave. These were not his. They could not be. He opened his eyes. The portrait was gone. On the desk lay a tattered leather-bound journal. He walked towards it, his movements stiff, as if his limbs were not entirely his own. He picked up the journal. The handwriting was spidery, desperate. He recognized it. It was the journal he had been reading, the one belonging to Arthur. But now, the ink seemed fresher, the paper less brittle. He flipped to the last entry. It was dated over a century ago. Yet, as he read the words, They resonated with a terrifying familiarity. The house has taken everything. My name, my memories, my very breath. He looked down at his own hand, holding the journal. The skin seemed paler, the knuckles more pronounced. It was Marcus, undeniably. He felt the boundaries of his own self begin to dissolve, the edges blurring. The room, the house, the past. It was all becoming one, and he was no longer an observer, but a participant, trapped within its ever-shifting labyrinthine heart. The reflection in the window had confirmed it. Marcus's gauntness was not merely the product of sleepless nights and neglected meals. It was a visible erosion, a hollowing out. He felt it in the subtle drag of his limbs, the persistent chill that no amount of firelight could dispel, and the increasing effort required to recall specifics. Dates, names, the precise sequence of events from his own past. They slipped through his grasp like fine sand. He was searching for a pattern, a commonality among the manor's previous occupants, particularly those whose stays had ended abruptly or mysteriously. The recurring themes were unsettling, a profound weariness, a creeping forgetfulness, the draining. The house demands its due. He found fragments from a ledger in 1842, meticulously detailing dwindling supplies and inexplicable expenses, followed by a sudden, incomplete entry. The master, thin as a wraith, speaks of the house's hunger. The ink trailed off, smeared as if the writer's hand had trembled violently. He was a historian, accustomed to sifting through the detritus of human suffering. But this was different. This wasn't plague or war or famine. This was internal, personal. He pushed back from the heavy oak desk, the chair scraping against the polished floorboards, a sound swallowed instantly by the vast room. He needed air, a break from the suffocating history. He grabbed his coat, the thick wool feeling strangely light in his hands, and stepped out into the biting winter afternoon. The path to the frozen lake was a familiar one, yet today it felt longer, the crunch of frozen earth beneath his boots amplified by the stillness. The trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches encrusted with ice, shimmering faintly in the weak sunlight. The air was sharp, clean, cutting through the musty scent of the manor that clung to him. When he reached the lake, the sight was stark. A vast, flat expanse of gray-white ice stretching to the distant snow-dusted tree line. He walked out onto the lake, the ice groaning softly under his weight, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the soles of his boots. He felt exposed, vulnerable, yet a strange clarity began to emerge. He thought of the diary entries, the ledgers. The descriptions of physical and mental decay were too consistent, too specific. And then he considered his own experience. The fading memories, the persistent fatigue, the pallor of his skin, the growing sense of an unseen presence. It wasn't a ghost he was contending with. It wasn't a haunting. The manor wasn't merely a vessel for lingering spirits. It was an organism, a predator. It savors the essence, the vital warmth, the very substance of being. It feeds not on flesh, but on memory, on joy, on sorrow, on the intricate tapestry of a life lived. The manor was not merely old, it was ancient, sentient, and malevolent. It wasn't a place where things happened. It was a thing that happened. And it was happening to him. They were the methodical, deliberate siphoning of his life force. He was not merely an inhabitant. He was a meal. The house was consuming him, slowly, inexorably. It was feeding. He had dismissed the local legends as superstition. Now he understood them as grim, understated truths. The house was not haunted, it was hungry. And he, Marcus, the skeptical historian, was its current, preferred sustenance. His determination, previously focused on uncovering history, now twisted into a desperate primal need for survival. The biting wind, a raw, indifferent presence, whipped strands of hair across Marcus's face on the frozen lake. The profound, chilling understanding had settled over him with the weight of ancient stone. The manor was not merely old. It was ancient, sentient, and malevolent. And it wanted him. A sudden, sharp clarity pierced through the mental fog that had been his constant companion for weeks. The lake's vast, unyielding expanse, stripped bare of the manor's insidious influence, offered a momentary reprieve. He was not yet entirely consumed. The entity had fed, but he still existed, a flickering ember of defiance in the encroaching darkness. He would find a way to fight back, to destroy it, or to sever its connection to this world, even if it meant sacrificing the last fragments of his sanity. The journey back to the manor felt different. The path, once merely a route, now seemed a threshold, a passage into the maw of a waiting beast. The skeletal trees clawed at the slate-gray sky, their branches like brittle fingers. He noted the way the snow crunched under his boots, the faint metallic scent of the freezing air, concrete details, anchors against the encroaching unreality. He pushed through the heavy oak doors, the groan of hinges a familiar lament. The manor watched him. He felt its gaze, a palpable pressure on his skull, urging him towards the comfortable lethargy it had cultivated within him. If the manor was an entity, it must have an origin, a weakness, a binding point. There had to be something. A flicker of memory, a symbol he'd seen carved into an obscure cornerstone, returned to him. It was a spiral, not quite a common Celtic knot, but something more angular, more unsettling. The Grand Library, a cavern of dusty tomes and forgotten knowledge, was his first destination. He ignored them, focusing on the scent of old leather and paper, on the rigid spines of books. He scanned the shelves, his eyes darting across titles, searching for anything out of place, anything that hinted at an esoteric history. As he reached for a heavy, leather-bound volume titled The Binding of Places, a sudden, sharp tremor ran through the floorboards. Marcus flinched, but his resolve held. This was the manor's counterattack, a psychological assault. He pulled the book free. Its pages were brittle, yellowed, filled with dense, archaic script. Buried within its dense passages, he found a reference to the manor, not by name, but by a description of its geographical location and a distinctive architectural detail. A specific, oddly placed keystone above the main entrance, bearing the spiral symbol he'd recalled. The text described the structure not as a dwelling, but as a vessel, a conduit for energies that had gone awry. It spoke of the original intent, corrupted by the hunger of the earth itself. His breath hitched. He wasn't merely dealing with a haunted house. He was dealing with a living, ancient geological anomaly, amplified and given consciousness by some failed, forgotten ritual. Frustrated, Marcus slammed the book shut. His gaze fell upon a small, intricate wooden box, half hidden behind the shelf where the book had rested. His fingers, trembling now with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, unlatched the delicate clasp. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object. It was a shard of obsidian, polished smooth, yet unnaturally jagged where it had been broken from a larger piece. As he picked it up, a faint, almost inaudible hum resonated through his palm, a vibration that felt both ancient and alive. Beneath the obsidian, a folded parchment lay hidden. He carefully unfurled it. The script was identical to the book, but this text was clearer, more direct. It detailed the severance of the earth heart, a ritual requiring the return of the fragment to its source, a specific chamber deep within the manor's foundations. The text warned of an immense cost, a sacrifice of presence, not life, but the complete and utter erasure of one's own identity, to become an unbeing, a nullity in the manor's wake. The obsidian shard, The heart fragment was the key. The manor pulsed around him now, its malevolence a tangible force, recognizing the threat. He had found his answer, his weapon, but the price was everything he was. The glimmer of resistance had led him to a terrifying, impossible choice. The ancient text, brittle and smelling of forgotten dust, lay open before Marcus. He reread the passage, the words confirming his terrifying hypothesis. The manor was a geological anomaly, a confluence of subterranean energies, given form and malevolent consciousness by a ritual long past. Not merely haunted, but alive. A hungry, patient entity. The book mentioned a severance ritual, a way to unbind the entity, a desperate, dangerous hope. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was his only path. He closed the tome, the sound sharp in the oppressive quiet. The air in the study thickened, taking on a metallic tang beneath the pervasive scent of aged paper and decay. He stood, his movements deliberate, a newfound resolve hardening his features. The house had been playing a long game, a slow consumption. Now, he was fighting back. As he stepped into the hallway, a heavy oak door directly behind him, one he had just passed, slammed shut with a concussive boom that vibrated through the floorboards. Marcus did not flinch. He recognized the tactic. The house was reacting, its patience exhausted. His discovery was a threat, and it was no longer content with subtle manipulation. He needed to find the chamber described in the text, the heart of the original ritual. The book hinted at its location deep within the manor's foundations, accessible only through a labyrinthine series of passages. He started down the main corridor, his footsteps echoing too loudly. The walls, usually a dull, faded damask, seemed to ripple at the edges of his vision, their patterns shifting into grotesque, leering faces. He blinked, and they returned to their innocuous, faded floral. His breath hitched. It was beginning. He reached the grand staircase, intending to descend to the cellar level. He recoiled, examining his palm. No residue, yet the sensation of something slimy persisted. He gripped the railing, forcing himself down, each step a conscious effort against an invisible resistance. At the base, a heavy iron-bound door, one he had never noticed before, now stood directly in his path. He pushed against it. It didn't budge. He put his shoulder into it, straining. The wood groaned, but the door remained sealed. The house was actively blocking him. Frustration simmered, but he kept it contained. He remembered a hidden passage behind a tapestry in the north wing, a route he had discovered weeks ago. Perhaps that would lead him deeper. As he passed the drawing room, a low guttural moan emanated from within, a sound of profound despair that scraped against his nerves. He ignored it, focusing on the tapestry. When he reached the north wing, the wall where the tapestry should have been was bare stone. Smooth, unbroken. The passage was gone. The house had sealed it. This wasn't merely illusion. It was a physical alteration. The house was reshaping itself around him. He was trapped within its ever-shifting architecture. So lost. He spun around. Nothing. Only the long, empty corridor, lit by the weak afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. He could feel eyes on him, countless unseen eyes. Suddenly, the floor beneath him buckled. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. A section of the wall to his left, previously solid, now seemed to shimmer, the stone dissolving into a swirling vortex of gray mist. From within the mist, skeletal hands, impossibly long and thin, reached out, their movements slow, deliberate, as if wading through unseen water. Their fingers twitched, beckoning. Marcus stared, his breath catching in his throat. These were not mere specters. They felt real, tangible in their spectral malice. They were the remnants, the consumed, and they wanted him to join them. The hands followed, extending further, their gripless fingers reaching for his shirt, his face. A vision flared, unbidden and overwhelming. A child, bundled in a heavy coat, stood alone in the center of the vast expanse, a tiny, vulnerable figure. The ice beneath the child's feet cracked, a spiderwebbing fracture that spread rapidly. The child stumbled, then fell. The image solidified, the sound of splintering ice deafening, the child's silent scream echoing in his mind. He shook his head, clearing the lingering image. It was a memory, a fear, dredged from deep within. The house was trying to break him, to drown him in his own despair. This was its game, to paralyze him with fear, to consume his sanity before it consumed his body. He knew what it was, and he knew what he had to do. The severance ritual. There had to be another way, another passage, another secret revealed in the ancient text. He started walking, his pace quickening, his gaze sweeping over the walls, searching for any anomaly, any crack in the house's malevolent facade. He would fight it until his last breath. Suddenly, the sensation of being observed intensified, an invisible pressure settling on his skin. He stood in the long, empty corridor, the weak afternoon light from the grimy windows now barely penetrating the deepening gloom. Shadows, previously indistinct, began to coalesce with a deliberate slowness, thickening at the periphery of his vision, suggesting forms that dissolved the moment he tried to fix them. It was not just the feeling of eyes, but the distinct impression of anticipation. He had sifted through too many forgotten ledgers, deciphered too many cryptic annotations, endured too many spectral intrusions to falter now. The house was a predator, but he had found its throat. His research, pieced together from fragmented diary entries and obscure architectural diagrams hidden behind a false wall, had pointed him towards the manor's true heart. Not the cellar nor the attic, but a chamber deep beneath the original foundations, sealed away for centuries. He descended a narrow, spiraling stone staircase he'd uncovered behind a hidden panel in the oldest wing. Not coherent words, but a chorus of indistinct murmurs, like 1,000 voices speaking just beyond the range of comprehension. They swirled around him, brushing against his ears, tickling the edges of his sanity. A child's tear-streaked face, a woman's silent scream, an old man's vacant stare. The house was trying to drown him in the echoes of its victims, to break his will before he reached its core. "Not my memories," he muttered, his voice hoarse, a desperate anchor to his own reality. "Not mine." The staircase terminated abruptly in a low, arched doorway of rough-hewn stone. He stepped through, into a space that defied logic. It was vast, far larger than the manor's footprint should allow, a cavernous expanse carved into the earth. The air shimmered with an ethereal pale blue light, emanating from the impossible feature at its center, a frozen lake. It was not merely frozen water. The ice was unnaturally clear, almost crystalline, yet it held within its depths a myriad of distortions. Marcus approached cautiously, his boots crunching on a fine layer of frost that coated the stone floor. As he drew closer, the blue light pulsed gently, revealing what lay beneath the frozen surface. Faces, countless faces, trapped within the ice, swirling in silent agony. Not fully formed, but spectral impressions, flickering like old photographs. He saw the child's face from his vision, the woman's, the old man's, and hundreds more, all distorted by the crystalline prison. They were fragments of memories, shards of sanity, vestiges of lives consumed. This was the house's sustenance, its larder, its true form revealed. The frozen lake was a solidified reservoir of stolen consciousness, a monument to its relentless hunger. It was the house's stomach, its brain, its very heart. The house didn't just haunt, it ingested. It didn't just kill, it preserved its victims, their essence becoming part of its own malevolent being. The ice was not merely frozen water, but frozen time, frozen existence. He gripped the ancient iron spike in his gloved hand, its tip sharpened to a precise point, its shaft etched with symbols he'd meticulously copied from a forgotten monastic text. This was his plan, to drive this object, a conduit for disruptive energies, into the very core of the house's power, to sever its connection, to shatter its icy heart. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the frigid air burning his lungs. The blue light intensified, pulsing with a furious rhythm. Cracks, thin as spiderwebs, began to propagate across the surface of the frozen lake, accompanied by a low, resonant groan that vibrated through the stone floor and into his bones. The faces beneath the ice contorted, their silent screams now palpable. The house was aware. It was resisting. Marcus raised the spike. He focused, channeling every ounce of his determination. He had to hit the exact center, the visible nexus of the swirling faces. The house roared, a soundless internal shriek that threatened to tear his mind apart. The cracks in the ice widened, a deep fissure snaking directly towards him, as if the lake itself meant to swallow him whole. He took a single, deliberate step onto the ice, the surface groaning ominously beneath his weight. He aimed. It was vast, far larger than the manor's footprint should allow, an impossible expanse. The frigid vacuum solidified, shaping itself around him. Marcus stood on a surface of flawless obsidian ice. The cold here was absolute, a presence that pressed against his skin, seeping into bone. It was not merely low temperature. It was the absence of all warmth, all life, all movement. Beneath the glassy surface, faint, indistinct shapes drifted like trapped smoke. Faces, half-formed, dissolving into the deep blue-black of the ice. Hands, reaching. Eyes, wide with silent despair. These were the echoes, the forgotten, the absorbed. This frozen lake was the house's core, its reservoir. It was the collective memory, the distilled consciousness of every soul it had ever consumed, held in stasis, feeding the entity that was the manor. He gripped his gloved hands into fists, the leather creaking faintly. No. He had come too far for this. He had not merely been a victim. He had been an observer, a reluctant scholar of its insidious mechanics. He would not simply dissolve. He began to walk, each step a deliberate crunch on the ancient ice. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint, high-pitched groaning that seemed to emanate from the depths of the lake itself, a sound like forgotten grief. As he moved, the images beneath the ice seemed to coalesce, to reach for him. He saw a child's face, wide-eyed and innocent, then an elderly woman's, etched with sorrow. They were not malevolent, merely present, a silent chorus of the devoured. The house was not actively trying to frighten him here. It was simply being. It was showing him his inevitable fate, inviting him to join the quiet, frozen collective. A thought, sharp and desperate, pierced through the glacial calm. If this was its memory, its collected consciousness, then perhaps it was also its vulnerability. A mind, however vast and ancient, could still be overwhelmed, still be broken. It was sentient, yes, but perhaps not omnipotent. He stopped at what felt like the center of the vast expanse. The air here was thinner, stealing the warmth directly from his lungs. He could feel his own memories beginning to fray at the edges, details of his former life, faces of distant colleagues, blurring into the gray static of the house's influence. Marcus closed his eyes, forcing himself to focus, to recall specific, vivid moments. The scent of old books in his study, the brittle texture of ancient parchment, the sharp taste of strong coffee. It was like shouting into a hurricane. The house merely absorbed them, folding them into its vast, indifferent tapestry. The house consumed, but it also held. It preserved. What if he could force it to preserve something it could not digest? something that would poison its stillness, disrupt its perfect frozen equilibrium. He opened his eyes. The faces beneath the ice seemed to shimmer, drawn to his presence. Not just the victims, but the mechanisms. The specific rituals, the forgotten names of those who had fed it, not just been fed upon. The knowledge he had gained, the patterns he had observed. He would turn that analysis into a weapon. He began to speak, his voice a raw, thin sound in the immensity. He recited the dates of the first known disappearances, the specific architectural anomalies he'd found hidden in its foundations, the precise historical details of the manor's construction that contradicted its fabricated legends. He spoke of the structural weaknesses he had noted, the patterns in its illusory manifestations, the specific frequencies of its hum. He wasn't just remembering, he was analyzing, critiquing, dissecting the house itself, articulating its flaws, its limitations, its very nature. The frozen lake responded. The deep groaning intensified, a resonant thrum that vibrated through the ice, up through Marcus's feet, into his very bones. But Marcus pressed on, his voice hoarse, his determination a desperate burning ember against the absolute zero. He listed the manor's specific vulnerabilities, the moments he had seen its power waver, the very structural points where its malevolent energy seemed to coalesce. He was feeding it not memories, but pure, unadulterated analysis of its own being. A self-assessment it had never performed, a mirror reflecting its own monstrosity. Suddenly, the ice beneath him fractured. A deep, sickening crack spiderwebbed outwards from his feet, accompanied by a sound like a mountain splitting apart. The entire frozen lake shuddered violently, throwing Marcus off balance. He fell to his knees, his hands scraping on the jagged ice. The faces beneath the surface screamed, a silent, collective horror that echoed only in his mind. A profound shift occurred. The vast space around him began to warp, the obsidian ice rippling and distorting. The sense of absolute stillness was replaced by a terrifying churn, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn. Marcus felt a wrenching sensation, as if his very being was being stretched thin, pulled in opposing directions. One part of him felt drawn into the fracturing depths, another felt violently expelled. The low, arched doorway of rough-hewn stone was behind him, now just another part of the wall, indistinguishable from the ancient masonry. The silence was the familiar, oppressive quiet of the manor, not the profound stillness of the lake. He pushed himself up, his body aching, every muscle screaming in protest. He felt different, not whole, not entirely himself. A part of him was still stretched thin, a faint resonant hum thrumming beneath his skin. He felt a new kind of awareness, a subtle understanding of the manor's structure, its hidden passages, its very pulse. He looked at his hands, then around the cellar. The house was still there, still formidable, but something had changed. He had inflicted a wound. He had seen its core, and he had forced it to see itself, to acknowledge its own imperfections. But in doing so, he had also become irrevocably entwined. He was outside the frozen lake. Yes, but the lake, he now realized, was also within him. It was no longer merely the absence of sound. It was a waiting. And he, Marcus, felt like a silent, waiting part of it.